Hello, these are flipped notes 7-1, our intro to motivation, and the first in our unit 7 over motivation, emotion, and personality. So my Bitmoji is highly motivated here to get to work and get punching. So we're going to look at a bunch of different motivation theories that could explain why maybe she feels that way. But first, what is motivation? Motivation includes all the influences that account for initiating, directing, intensity, and the persistence of behavior. But basically, it helps us to explain why do we do what we do. Psychology is all about our behavior, and so much about that is motivation. This guy, Aaron Ralston, we heard about him in the crash course, and for those in class, we talked about him a little bit more, was motivated to actually cut off his own arm when he was stuck in a canyon with his arm pinned between a rock and the canyon wall. Would you have the motivation to do that? Lots of different sources for motivation: biological factors, emotional, cognitive, social, and all the different theories we'll look at today take all of those into consideration. We've got 9 different theories here, and there's even more, but just those in this section. The first couple theories will have to do with instincts. Our instincts are innate, automatic dispositions toward responding a particular way when there's a specific stimulus. Instincts show up more often in animals, like birds can build a nest perfectly the first time, and salmon just know how to swim upstream so they can spawn. And they know how to do it because it's in their genetic code. But do humans have instincts? William James, who we know as the American father of psychology, says yes, and that's a big part of our motivation. He identified 37 different basic instincts, things like cleanliness, curiosity, parental love, sociability, sympathy, jealousy. Other psychologists that followed behind him identified around 10,000 more instincts. But what he's calling instincts, people today who are researchers might say, those aren't really instincts, more just general tendencies that we have as humans, but not part of our genetic code and not something that we know how to do innately the same way that a bird knows how to make a nest. So those are the problems with that theory, is that these instincts are really not quite as common in humans as they are with other species. That while we know how to do some things, ask a first-time parent, do they just have the instinct on how to change a diaper, on how to raise their child? And they'll tell you, no, you figure it out, you learn books, but you just do not innately know that. So now most psychologists know that other than the evolutionary psychologists, most believe that human behavior is directed by physiological and psychological forces. When we're thinking of instincts that we do have as humans, we're thinking of things that are present at birth, and they're probably more often what we would consider reflexes, like the rooting and grasping and sucking reflexes, some of our innate ability to show the same facial expressions. We'll actually be talking about that later in this unit. Instincts to make sure that we can achieve or satisfy hunger, thirst, and warmth. Our Moro or startle reflex, that Babinski reflex, those are all in real instincts we have, but tend to fade away after just a few months. Our boy Sigmund Freud shows up here because he also had an instinct theory. He said that we have some unconscious instincts that motivate human behavior. And of course, for Freud, they're based through sexual and aggressive instincts. He calls these instincts Eros and Thanatos. Eros is our survival instinct, just a form of preservation. And Thanatos is more of our death instinct. And Freud said that these are harbored in what he called the section of the personality known as the id, that's where our most basic instincts are located. And we'll talk about the id, the ego, and the superego in a later section. But for Eros and Thanatos, Eros included sex drive, drive for nurturing and to affiliate with others. And Thanatos included aggression towards the self, self-criticism, depression, and aggression towards others, and that's anger and prejudice. And he said that people were not always in balance. If Thanatos was stronger, then that death instinct might make you be more engaging in risk-taking behaviors, more prone towards aggression, whereas people who had a stronger Eros instinct may have a stronger sex drive or maybe be more nurturing. Our next theory, moving on to the evolutionary theories, Recall from earlier in the year that the evolutionary perspective says that our main motivator in life is to survive and then also to get our genes out there into the world. So all of our behavior extends from those as our main motivation. David Best did a study on what men and women want. I think we've talked about him before. He had a survey of 10,000 men and women all across the world, 33 countries, 6 continents, and he consistently found in both developed and developing and even more primitive societies that what males want are prospective mates who are youthful and in good health, which shows that they have this seeming instinct or desire to have a mate where they can spread their gene pool. Whereas females generally are looking for traits in a partner that represent maturity and even wealth, because these are going to be things that help them to raise their children. That's part of the evolutionary perspective. Our next ones, theories are based off of needs and drives. So although we don't really have very many instincts, the true innate type, we do have needs and drives. A need is anything that's required for us to survive: food, water, shelter, things that bring us to homeostasis when our body is in balance. The drives are what's controlled in our hypothalamus. These are the motivators that are inside us that help drive us to fulfill those needs. So both needs and drives push us into action from the inside out. So we have drives, which create needs, and then we respond to those with behaviors. Clark Hull has the drive reduction theory. This is from the 1950s, and this pretty much replaced the idea of instinct theory. Hull said that we have biological needs that demand satisfaction. So we have a need, we're in a state of deprivation, like we're hungry or we're thirsty or we're tired. So that creates a drive, a state of bodily tension that's caused by a need, that we feel hungry because of that need for food or that need for water. And that encourages a drive reducing behavior. Like we're going to walk down to the cafeteria and we're going to eat food. Or if you're starving and you don't have money, maybe you are driven to rob a store or to engage in petty theft because you have to have food. So he says that drive reducing behavior is to satisfy that tension that's caused by the need. All of that because we're out of homeostasis. Adding on to that, he said that when we are out of homeostasis, that could be anything from our body temperature, like we're cold or we're hot, our blood sugar is low, oxygen levels, like we're out of breath. But he said that once we do engage in those behaviors, that our body remembers that. So when that drive shows up again, we know how to respond to it and that we form habits to kind of get used to that. He also compared primary and secondary drives. Primary are those that are physiological, innate drives like hunger, thirst, and sexual desire. And secondary are psychological and more the result of experience. For example, wealth, success, and social approval. Both are important, and he said that we actually use the secondary drives as a way to reduce the primary drives. Our next theory is the incentive theory. So where our needs and drives push us into action, the incentives, which can be both positive or negative incentives or stimuli, pull us in one way or another in order to satisfy our needs and drives. So the value of the incentive is influenced by biological, cognitive factors. Like we're hungry, our incentive is there's an ice cream sundae there. We know it's going to satisfy our hunger. Incentive theory stresses the role of the environment. So this is not just internal biological factors now, but external things. And those incentives can include things from praise to rewards like money. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation theory. Intrinsic motivation is just your desire to do something because you engage in it, you enjoy doing it. So you're intrinsically motivated to go play with your dog. No one's telling you you have to, maybe your parents do, but if you really just want to do something, you like to go running, you are intrinsically motivated. Extrinsic motivation is you're doing something in order to gain a reward or to avoid a punishment. So maybe you exercise just because you know if you don't, you're going to gain weight. But a lot of times it's both, that maybe you really do enjoy exercising, so you are intrinsically motivated to go running, but you do also like the reward that you get. You like the endorphins, or you like that it helps you stay healthy. Adding on to this, we have the over-justification effect. The over-justification effect says that if you already are intrinsically motivated to do something, and then you add on to that too much extrinsic motivation, that you start doing it for a reward or to avoid a punishment, then you start to lose your intrinsic motivation, and it's not as enjoyable as before. And the example we usually use for over justification effect are professional athletes. That sometimes you get these athletes, a pro football player who's been playing pee wee football since they were little, and they truly loved the sport. They had so much intrinsic motivation for it. But once they went pro, now you added that extrinsic motivation, and it starts to become about their salary and their contract and endorsement deals. And that intrinsic value starts to dwindle. A lot of times you hear people say that they lost their love for the game, and it's just not there anymore. That's the over justification effect. Our next one is actually more of a quick review because this was from our last unit, but Harlow's contact comfort theory is also a motivation theory. He says that Hull was overlooking other factors, that Hull was really just looking at drives and biological factors, and that's what made him consider what is the importance of the mother. Was it just biological factors? And we know from his studies where he took monkeys away from their mothers and replaced them with wire and cloth mothers, that he identified the importance of contact comfort, showed the need for contact comfort. Our next theory is the theory of optimal arousal. This one says that humans have motivation not to eliminate arousal, but to seek their optimal level of arousal. And in this case, we don't mean sexual arousal, we just mean more like excitement. And it's something that they enjoy getting their heart rates up. Generally, we try to increase our arousal when it's too low, when we're bored, or we try to decrease arousal if we're too stressed out, it's too high. He said people do have their own different levels of optimal arousal, and that we seek to try to do that. Maybe your optimal level of arousal is you want to go to Six Flags and ride roller coasters, or you want to go bungee jumping, or maybe you're more satisfied with just hanging out at home and watching movies and reading books. So our personality types can often reflect those different levels of optimal arousal, that sensation seekers maybe are more susceptible to boredom. The Yerkes-Dodson Law is sort of an extension of the arousal theory, but it's not the same. They are two separate things. The Yerkes-Dodson Law says that we actually perform best when our arousal level is moderate. So we can be calm, have low arousal, or we can be way pumped up. But we actually perform best at optimal arousal when you're not too relaxed, not too sleepy, and not overly stressed, and you're not worrying too much about the results. So moderate arousal is best. Our next theory has to do with Abraham Maslow and the humanist perspective. Maslow says that we actually have lots of needs and that they're competing. You're tired, but you want to achieve high grades. You're hungry, but you also want to be healthy and eat well. So he organizes our needs into a hierarchy and said that our basic needs has to be met first. So Maslow's pyramid puts the basic needs at the bottom, and at the top, he has self-actualization, which is fulfilling your full potential. And he said that people who are self-actualized have lots of peak experiences. There are these profound moments of love and understanding, and where you feel whole and like you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're aware of truth and justice and harmony, and that you just feel like you have found your place in the world. At the bottom of the pyramid, the first two levels are physiological needs and safety needs. And these are what we need just for survival: food, water, warmth, rest, feeling safe and secure. It can be survival and bodily comfort, stability in your family, stability in your workplace, stability in your country. Those are our basic needs. Moving up the pyramid are our psychological needs, the needs of feeling like you belong and you have love through intimate relationships and friends. And then esteem needs, prestige, and feeling of accomplishment, that you feel competent, that you are getting your needs met in the workplace in terms of approval and status and sense of achievement. And then at the top of the pyramid, he identifies self-actualization, where you're really meeting your best, you're fulfilling your needs, and you're kind of living your best life. You're reaching your full potential. Um, Wisdom, discernment, understanding can lead to a new focus in helping others. Later, Maslow updated and he actually added a couple more. Cognitive needs, this need to know and understand. I think of this as people who seek higher education, that they've got all these other needs and they become curious and want to just know more. And then aesthetic needs, symmetry, order, beauty. People who seek, like making sure their home is beautiful, fashion, that you've met all these other needs, and now you're able to think about those. And then finally, Maslow added even one more, I'll come back to this slide, which he called transcendence, where you're so self actualized, you're to the point where you can help others to self actualize. That makes me think of the Oprah Winfrey's and the Ellen DeGeneres and the Bill Gates people of the world, that they are able to help others achieve what they need to be self actualized. Some other points about Maslow's hierarchy. His theory is a bit arbitrary, which means it's not fixed. That there, sometimes, some people are not necessarily getting their safety needs met, but maybe they're getting their other needs, that you can miss things here and there. Also, you don't have to be fulfilled 100% in each level in order to move up the pyramid. That maybe you're at 85% in your basic physiological needs, 70% in level 2, 50% in level 3, 40% in level 4, and you're just a little bit at level 5, self-actualized. But that could easily go away. That for so many of us, our safety needs were rocked this year with the pandemic. And maybe that drops out, the rest of our pyramid, or somebody's home burns down, or they lose a loved one, or they lose a job. All of those kind of affect their pyramid. Our final theory about motivation is on cognitive dissonance, and this is from Leon Festinger. But dissonance is when we have an inconsistency or a difference. And in this case, he means we have dissonance between our attitudes and our beliefs and our actions. And the classic example for cognitive dissonance is a doctor who smokes. This doctor is clearly telling others that smoking is unhealthy. She knows it's unhealthy, yet she continues to engage in that behavior. So when we have that dissonance, we're aware that our attitudes and our actions don't coincide. So we kind of feel this tension. We feel uncomfortable, and we have to compensate for that. And there's a few ways we do that. Through rationalization. Maybe she's telling herself, well, I'm going to die anyway, or I'm really healthy otherwise, or it's just my one bad habit. I'm not smoking crack or anything, or maybe I really only smoke maybe like once a month when I get super stressed. Another way to resolve the dissonance is to change your action. She could just stop smoking, and then that tension goes away. And in a lot of cases, we're in that denial stage, which some of those that I mentioned are actually also denial. So that's cognitive dissonance. And those are all of our motivation theories. And that was 7-1 flipped notes.